I was sitting at my desk in Austin reviewing code for our latest app update when my phone rang. Mom's voice came through cheerfully, like she was calling to chat about the weather. "Ulysses, sweetie, I have wonderful news about Brooklyn's wedding tomorrow. We've taken care of everything financially. We emptied your savings accounts and sold the house to cover all the expenses." My sandwich froze halfway to my mouth. Dad's voice echoed from the background. Something about family sacrifices and doing what's necessary. Before I could speak, Brooklyn grabbed the phone, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Thank you so much for contributing to my special day. Trevor and I are getting married at the country club, and it's going to be absolutely perfect." When I finally managed to stutter a protest, Mom cut me off firmly. "We knew you'd understand. Goodbye." The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a long moment, then slowly began to smile. My name is Ulysses Grant Morrison, and at 29, I thought I had learned to expect the unexpected from my family. Running a successful software development company in Austin had taught me to handle crisis situations, but nothing quite prepared me for that phone call. I set down my half-eaten turkey sandwich and leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, processing what had just happened. The irony wasn't lost on me. 5 years ago, when Dad suffered his heart attack and the medical bills nearly destroyed them, I had secretly purchased our childhood home in Nashville for $400,000. The foreclosure notice had been sitting on their kitchen counter when I visited during Christmas break from my job at a tech company in California. Mom was crying over bills spread across the dining room table where we used to do homework, and Dad was talking about declaring bankruptcy. I never told them I bought the house. Instead, I created an elaborate fiction where they continued making mortgage payments to what they believed was their original lender. Every month, they dutifully sent $850 to a post office box I maintained, thinking they were paying down their debt. In reality, I was their landlord, and they were my tenants living rent-free. It seemed like the kindest way to help them maintain their dignity, while ensuring they had a roof over their heads. The house was now worth approximately $600,000, thanks to Nashville's booming real estate market and the neighborhood's historic designation. My parents had no idea they had been living in my property for half a decade, carefully maintaining what they thought was their own investment. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer, Marcus Thompson, who handled both my business affairs and personal legal matters. Marcus had been the one to structure the house purchase, originally creating the shell company that officially owned the property while keeping my name off any documents my parents might stumble across. "Marcus, it's Ulysses. My parents just called claiming they sold my house and emptied my bank accounts for my sister's wedding. Can you walk me through what they could actually access?" I asked, pacing to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Austin. "Give me 5 minutes to pull up your accounts," Marcus replied, his keyboard clicking in the background. "Okay, I see what happened. They accessed that old joint checking account from your college days. You left about $3,000 in there and never closed it. Everything else is protected under your business structure, and personal accounts they don't have access to. Your startup funds are completely safe." Relief washed over me, followed immediately by curiosity about how they thought they had the authority to sell property they didn't own. I called Sarah Chen, my real estate attorney in Nashville, who confirmed my suspicions. "Ulysses, I just got a very confused call from a realtor named Amanda Foster. Your parents apparently listed the property yesterday with a buyer already lined up for tonight. She's quite upset because the title search shows you as the owner, not them. The sale cannot proceed without your authorization." The pieces were falling into place, but I still couldn't understand the urgency. Brooklyn had been engaged 3 times in the past 2 years, each time with elaborate plans that fell through when she discovered some flaw in her chosen partner. She was notorious for impulsive decisions and expensive tastes, but getting married with 1 day's notice seemed extreme even for her. I spent the next hour making calls to understand the full scope of the situation. The picture that emerged was both heartbreaking and infuriating. My parents had been struggling financially for months, borrowing money from Dad's brother Raymond and selling personal possessions to fund what they believed would be Brooklyn's perfect wedding. The pressure of maintaining appearances while secretly drowning in debt had driven them to increasingly desperate measures. Brooklyn, now 26, had always been the golden child who could do no wrong. Where I had worked 2 jobs to pay for college and started my career from nothing, she had been given every advantage our parents could provide. Private school, new car on her 16th birthday, sorority fees, spring break trips to Europe, and a generous allowance that continued long after she graduated. The pattern of favoritism was so ingrained that I had accepted it as natural until this moment. Her current fiancé, Trevor Walsh, was supposedly a pharmaceutical sales executive from Nashville who drove expensive cars and wore designer suits. According to Brooklyn's social media posts, they had met 6 months ago at a charity fundraiser and had been inseparable ever since. The photos showed them at upscale restaurants, weekend trips to Las Vegas, and shopping excursions that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. But something about the timeline bothered me. 6 months from meeting to marriage seemed fast even for Brooklyn, and the fact that she was pushing for a ceremony with 24 hours' notice suggested either incredible romance or something more troubling underneath. I made one final call before heading to my car. A contact from my college days, Jake Morrison, no relation despite the same last name, worked as a private investigator in Nashville. I asked him to do a quick background check on Trevor Walsh, pharmaceutical sales, Nashville area. "Give me 2 hours," Jake said. "I'll text you what I find." As I drove out of the parking garage beneath my office building, my phone buzzed with a text message from Jake. Problem: Trevor Walsh under federal investigation for prescription drug fraud. Call me immediately. The casual phone call from my parents had just become something much more serious than family drama over money and favoritism. My sister was about to marry a man who might be a federal criminal, and my parents had bankrupted themselves to pay for a wedding that could be a front for illegal activity. I pressed the accelerator and headed north toward Nashville, knowing that the next 24 hours would change everything for our family one way or another. The 6-hour drive to Nashville gave me plenty of time to process Jake's preliminary findings about Trevor Walsh. The man my sister planned to marry had 2 previous arrests for fraudulent prescription schemes, outstanding warrants in Oregon, and financial records that showed suspicious cash deposits totaling over $200,000 in the past year. None of this information had reached Brooklyn or my parents. I arrived at the house on Belmont Boulevard just after midnight, and the sight that greeted me was both familiar and surreal. Our childhood home, a 1920s craftsman bungalow with a wraparound porch and mature oak trees, was buzzing with activity despite the late hour. Catering vans lined the street, and I could see people moving around inside with boxes and equipment. The front door was propped open, and I walked into what had been transformed into wedding headquarters. Diana Ross, and she always clarified she was not the singer, was the wedding planner Mom had hired despite the family's financial situation. She was directing a team of florists who were creating elaborate centerpieces in what used to be our living room. "The ceremony is in 14 hours, Diana announced to no one in particular, checking items off a clipboard. "We need those altar arrangements finished and loaded by 6 in the morning, and someone needs to confirm the string quartet knows they're playing processional music, not reception background." I found Mom in the kitchen, surrounded by catering staff who were preparing hors d'oeuvres for 200 guests. She looked exhausted with dark circles under her eyes and her gray hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. When she saw me, her face brightened with relief and guilt in equal measure. "Ulysses, honey, I'm so glad you made it. I know the phone call was sudden, but everything is happening so fast and Brooklyn is just glowing with happiness." She hugged me tightly, and I could feel how thin she had become. "Your father is upstairs trying to rest. The doctor said he needs to avoid stress, but you know how he gets about family events. Mom, we need to talk about the money situation." I began carefully, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. Oh, don't worry about any of that. The important thing is that Brooklyn gets her special day. She's been planning this wedding for months. And when Trevor proposed last week and suggested they move the date up because of his job transfer, well, we just couldn't disappoint her. The timeline was becoming clearer, but it raised new questions. Brooklyn had been planning a wedding for months, but only got engaged a week ago, and Trevor was conveniently moving away right after the ceremony. The pattern suggested someone running from something, possibly law enforcement. I climbed the stairs to the second floor past walls, lined with family photos chronicling Brooklyn's various achievements and milestones. My own accomplishments were notably absent from the display, a fact that had stopped bothering me years ago, but still stung when I noticed it. Brooklyn's childhood bedroom had been converted into a bridal suite for the evening. I knocked on the door and heard her voice call out for me to enter. She was standing in front of a full-length mirror wearing what looked like an $8,000 designer wedding dress, while two women I didn't recognize made last-minute alterations. "Ulysses, I can't believe you actually came. I thought you might be too busy with your computer work to make it." She turned from the mirror and struck a pose. "What do you think? Trevor says I look like a princess, and he should know, because he's been to enough fancy events to recognize quality." Brooklyn had always been beautiful in a classic high-maintenance way. 5'6" with carefully maintained blonde hair, perfect makeup, and the kind of confidence that came from being told she was special every day of her life. But looking at her now, I noticed something brittle around the edges. Her smile seemed forced, and her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the dress. "Brooklyn, can we talk privately for a minute?" I asked, nodding toward the women with sewing supplies. "Sure, ladies, could you give us a few minutes?" They gathered their materials and left us alone. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. How well do you actually know Trevor? 6 months seems like a short time to plan a wedding." Her defensive posture was immediate and predictable. "Ulysses, just because you've never found anyone willing to put up with your workaholic lifestyle doesn't mean other people can't fall in love quickly. Trevor and I have a connection you probably couldn't understand. What does he do for work exactly? And why is he transferring so suddenly? He's in pharmaceutical sales, which is very lucrative, and his company is promoting him to regional manager in Miami. We'll be moving there right after the honeymoon." She fidgeted with her engagement ring, a gaudy diamond that looked expensive but somehow fake. "He says Miami is where the real opportunities are in his field." Before I could ask more questions, the door burst open and Trevor Walsh himself walked in without knocking. He was exactly what I expected based on Brooklyn's description: tall, dark hair with too much styling product, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His smile was practiced and calculating, like a used car salesman who had perfected the art of appearing trustworthy. "Ulysses Wright, Brooklyn's told me so much about you. Thanks for contributing to our special day. I know family sacrifices are never easy, but this wedding is going to be an investment in our future together." He extended his hand for a shake, and his grip was deliberately too firm, lasting too long. "Actually, Trevor, I'd love to hear more about your work. Pharmaceutical sales must be interesting." I watched his face carefully for any reaction. "Oh, it's pretty standard stuff. I work with doctors and hospitals to make sure they have access to the medications their patients need. Very rewarding work, helping people get better." His phone buzzed constantly during our brief conversation, and he kept glancing at it with increasing nervousness. "Which company do you work for?" I pressed. "It's a smaller firm, specialized products. You probably wouldn't have heard of it." Trevor's evasiveness was obvious, and I could see Brooklyn starting to notice his discomfort. But enough about work. Tomorrow is about celebrating love and commitment. I decided to test something. "Miami sounds exciting. Have you found a place to live down there?" "Trevor has it all figured out. He's very organized about planning ahead," Brooklyn interjected, but I noticed she looked uncertain about the details. "Actually, babe, we should probably get some rest. Big day tomorrow. Trevor moved toward the door. Ulysses, I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to get acquainted after the wedding. After he left Brooklyn, and I were alone again, I could see doubt creeping into her expression, but she was too proud to admit she might have made a mistake. Brooklyn, if you had any concerns about Trevor or about moving to Miami, would you tell me? I asked gently. Why would I have concerns? He loves me, he's successful, and he wants to give me the life I deserve. That's more than most women get. But her voice lacked conviction. I spent the next hour talking with Mom and Dad about the financial situation. Dad looked terrible, gray-faced and breathing heavily. The stress of the wedding preparation and mounting bills had clearly taken a toll on his already compromised heart condition. They walked me through the expenses they had committed to $30,000 for the venue at the exclusive Hermitage Country Club, $20,000 for catering, $8,000 for flowers, $5,000 for photography, $3,000 for music, and thousands more for smaller details. The total approached $90,000 money they didn't have and had cobbled together through desperate measures. We borrowed $20,000 from your Uncle Raymond. Dad admitted, looking ashamed. He said he could get us a good deal on a short-term loan through some business contacts of his. That detail sent alarm bells ringing in my head. Uncle Raymond had a gambling problem and often borrowed money from questionable sources to cover his losses. If he was facilitating loans for the wedding, my parents might have inadvertently gotten involved with dangerous people. Mom, Dad, I need you to understand something important. I own this house. I bought it 5 years ago when you were facing foreclosure, and you've been living here as my tenants. You had no legal right to sell it, and any sale contract you signed is void. They stared at me in stunned silence. Mom's hand flew to her mouth and Dad sank heavily into his recliner. But we've been making mortgage payments, Mom whispered. The bank statements, the payment booklet. You've been making payments to me through a company I set up to handle the transaction. I never told you because I wanted you to feel like you still owned your home. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Years of pride and independence crumbled as they realized they had been living on their son's charity without knowing it. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Dad spoke. Son, we don't know what to say. We thought we were taking care of ourselves. You were taking care of yourselves. You maintained the house, paid all the utilities, kept up the property. I just made sure you wouldn't lose it. But I could see the damage was done. In trying to help them preserve their dignity, I had inadvertently set up a situation where they felt deceived and dependent. The family dynamics that had always been complicated were about to become much more complex. As I settled into my old bedroom for what little remained of the night, I heard hushed voices from Brooklyn's room through the thin walls. She was on the phone with someone, and although I couldn't make out all the words, her tone was increasingly upset. Whatever conversation she was having, it wasn't the happy chat of a bride on her wedding eve. My phone buzzed with another text from Jake. Federal agents have been monitoring Trevor for 3 months. Major bust planned soon. Call me first thing tomorrow. I stared at the ceiling, knowing that in a few hours I would have to decide between protecting my sister from a dangerous man and preserving what remained of my family's trust and relationships. The wedding that was supposed to be Brooklyn's perfect day was shaping up to be a disaster that could destroy us all. I woke up at 5 in the morning to the sound of shouting from downstairs. Mom's voice carried up through the floorboards, speaking rapidly to someone on the phone. By the time I made it to the kitchen, she was hanging up with a look of panic on her face. That was the realtor, Amanda Foster. She says there's a problem with the house sale, and the buyer is threatening to sue us for wasting his time. I don't understand what's happening. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table in his bathrobe, looking more fragile than I had ever seen him. His morning medications were laid out next to a cup of coffee that had gone cold while he stared out the window at the oak tree where Brooklyn and I used to play as children. The problem is that you can't sell a house you don't own. I explained, pouring myself coffee from the pot Mom had made strong enough to wake the dead. Amanda Foster should have done a title search before listing the property. Now she's embarrassed because she looked incompetent in front of her client. Before Mom could respond, the doorbell rang insistently. I opened it to find a woman in her 40s wearing a power suit and an expression of barely controlled fury. Her auburn hair was pulled back severely, and she clutched a briefcase like a weapon. "I'm Amanda Foster from Premier Properties, and I need to speak with Harold and Janet Morrison immediately about this fraudulent real estate transaction." "Please come in," I said calmly. "I'm Ulysses Morrison. I think you need to speak with me." We gathered in the living room, which still smelled like the lilies and roses the florists had been arranging until 3 in the morning. Amanda Foster opened her briefcase with aggressive efficiency and pulled out a stack of papers. "Your parents signed a listing agreement yesterday to sell this property for $575,000. My client, Meridian Development Corporation, was prepared to close today with cash. Now I discover that the people who signed my contract don't even own the house they're trying to sell." "That's correct," I replied. "I purchased this property 5 years ago. Here's the deed." I handed her a copy of the document Marcus Thompson had emailed me earlier. Amanda Foster's face cycled through several expressions as she realized the full scope of the problem. This is a nightmare. Meridian was planning to demolish this house and build condominiums. They've already invested $15,000 in architectural plans and environmental studies. Then they should be more careful about doing due diligence before making offers, I said. "No sale is going to happen without my consent, which I'm not giving." After Amanda Foster left making threats about lawsuits for her wasted time and damaged reputation, I sat down with my parents to explain the legal situation. Mom cried quietly, while Dad struggled to process how their desperate attempt to help Brooklyn had backfired so catastrophically. "We only accessed that old bank account because we thought it might have enough to cover the final wedding expenses," Dad said. "When we saw $3,000 in there, it seemed like a sign that everything would work out." "You used forged documentation to access that account," I pointed out. "The bank has security footage and documentation. Technically, you committed fraud even though the money was effectively mine." The weight of potential criminal charges hung over the conversation. My parents, who had never been in trouble with the law, faced the possibility of prosecution for theft and fraud. Meanwhile, their daughter was about to marry a man who was already under federal investigation for crimes far more serious. My phone rang with a call from Marcus Thompson, who had been working since dawn to understand the legal implications of the previous day's events. "Ulysses, I've been talking with the bank's fraud department and the district attorney's office. Your parents are looking at potential felony charges unless we can work out some kind of restitution agreement. The good news is that since you're the victim and the amount was relatively small, we might be able to handle this as a civil matter." "What about the house situation?" "The realtor and development company don't have grounds for a lawsuit against you, but they might go after your parents for misrepresentation. It's going to be expensive to defend even if we ultimately win." While Marcus explained the legal complexities, Jake Morrison called with an update on Trevor Walsh that made everything else seem trivial by comparison. "The federal agents I contacted say they've been building a case against Trevor for over a year. He's part of a network that steals prescription medications from hospitals and resells them on the black market. The DEA believes he's laundered over $2 million through fake businesses and phony transactions." What does this mean for Brooklyn and the wedding? "They want to arrest him today, but they're hoping to do it in a way that gathers maximum evidence about his criminal network. A public event like a wedding where he might let his guard down around accomplices could be perfect for their investigation." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Federal agents wanted to use my sister's wedding as bait to catch Trevor and his associates. Brooklyn would become an unwitting participant in a law enforcement operation that could put her in physical danger. I spent the next 2 hours making phone calls to understand everyone's position. The FBI had been watching Trevor for months, documenting his criminal activities and building a case that could dismantle an entire drug trafficking network. The wedding represented their best opportunity to catch him with evidence and associates that would strengthen their prosecution. But using Brooklyn as bait without her knowledge felt like another kind of betrayal, even if it was necessary to protect her from a dangerous criminal. I thought about the pattern of family secrets that had brought us to this point: my secret house, purchased my parents' secret debts, Trevor's secret criminal life, and now the government's secret investigation. Around 10 in the morning, Uncle Raymond arrived at the house looking more nervous than I had ever seen him. He was a smaller, grayer version of Dad, and normally one of the most cheerful people I knew. Today, he could barely make eye contact with anyone. "Harold, we need to talk privately," he said, pulling Dad aside into the backyard. Through the kitchen window, I watched them have an intense conversation that involved a lot of gesturing and head shaking. When they came back inside, Dad looked like he had aged 10 years. "Raymond borrowed the money for the wedding from some people he does business with in his poker games," Dad explained quietly. "They want their $20,000 back by Monday, regardless of whether the wedding happens." "What happens if you can't pay them back?" I asked, though I suspected I didn't want to know the answer. "These aren't the kind of people who accept payment plans," Uncle Raymond admitted. "I thought I could cover it with some gambling wins, but things haven't worked out the way I planned. The wedding was supposed to start in 4 hours, and our family was facing potential federal charges, civil lawsuits, and threats from dangerous creditors. Brooklyn was upstairs getting ready to marry a man who was about to be arrested by federal agents, and our parents were discovering that their life's work to provide security for their children had resulted in chaos and debt. I made a decision that would change everything. I called Agent Catherine Miles, the FBI contact Jake had given me, and arranged to meet her before the wedding ceremony. If federal agents were going to use my sister as bait, I wanted to know exactly what they were planning and what I could do to protect my family. The morning that had started with hope for Brooklyn's happiness had become a collision course between family loyalty, federal law enforcement, and criminal justice. In 3 hours, I would have to choose between betraying my sister's trust or enabling her marriage to a dangerous criminal. As I put on the suit I had brought for the ceremony, I realized that this wedding would either be the event that finally brought our family together or the disaster that destroyed us completely. Either way, nothing would ever be the same after today. Agent Catherine Miles looked nothing like what I expected from a federal investigator. She was in her early 40s with short brown hair and the kind of calm demeanor that suggested she had handled much worse situations than family weddings gone wrong. We met at a coffee shop 6 blocks from the house, far enough away to avoid being seen by anyone who might recognize me. "Mr. Morrison, I appreciate you reaching out to us. Your sister is in more danger than she realizes, and your family's cooperation could be crucial for both her safety and our investigation." Agent Miles spread photographs across the small table between us. Trevor Walsh with various men in expensive suits. Trevor entering buildings that looked like medical facilities. Trevor handling briefcases and envelopes in what appeared to be parking lot exchanges. Trevor Walsh is a key figure in a prescription drug trafficking network that operates across 6 states. They steal medications from hospitals, forge prescriptions, and resell everything from painkillers to cancer treatment drugs on the black market. People have died because they couldn't get medications that Trevor's network diverted for profit. The scope of Trevor's crimes was staggering. This wasn't just white-collar fraud. It was organized crime that directly harmed vulnerable people who needed life-saving medications. "Why haven't you arrested him already?" "We need evidence that will let us prosecute the entire network, not just individual members." Trevor has been careful to insulate himself from direct handling of the stolen drugs, but we believe he's planning to use today's wedding as cover for a major transaction with suppliers from Memphis and Atlanta. Agent Miles showed me surveillance photos taken outside the country club where the wedding ceremony was scheduled. Men in dark suits who clearly weren't wedding guests had been spotted around the venue, and electronic surveillance suggested they were coordinating with Trevor for some kind of exchange during the reception. What does this mean for Brooklyn's safety? That depends partly on you. We've been monitoring Trevor's communications, and he's becoming increasingly paranoid about law enforcement attention. Yesterday, he told associates that if anything went wrong, he might need to disappear quickly and permanently. The implication was terrifying. Trevor saw Brooklyn as either an asset to be protected or a liability to be eliminated depending on how events unfolded. Her romantic fantasy of a perfect wedding day was actually a criminal operation where she was both bait and potential victim. "What do you need from me?" Agent Miles pulled out a small electronic device about the size of a quarter. "This is a recording device. We need you to wear it during the wedding and try to get Trevor talking about his business associates or any plans he might have for after the ceremony. If he says anything that suggests Brooklyn is in immediate danger, we'll move in early. And if he doesn't, then we wait until he makes contact with his criminal associates and arrest everyone simultaneously. The reception will become a federal crime scene, but your sister should be safe." I agreed to wear the recording device, but I insisted on conditions that would protect my family from prosecution for their financial crimes and ensure Brooklyn's safety was the top priority, regardless of the federal investigation's needs. Agent Miles agreed to immunity for my parents in exchange for their cooperation and testimony about any financial irregularities they might have noticed in Trevor's behavior. She also promised that federal marshals would be positioned throughout the wedding venue to ensure Brooklyn's immediate safety if the situation became dangerous. When I returned to the house, the wedding preparations were in full swing despite the legal chaos swirling underneath. Caterers were loading equipment into vans, florists were making final adjustments to arrangements, and the photographer was testing lighting setups in the backyard, where the ceremony would take place if weather permitted. Brooklyn looked radiant and terrified in equal measure. Her dress was perfect, her makeup flawless. But something in her eyes suggested she knew more about Trevor's true nature than she was willing to admit. When I found her in the bridal suite, she was staring at herself in the mirror with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Brooklyn, can I ask you something without you getting defensive?" "Depends on what you're asking," she replied, adjusting her veil for the 20th time. "Have you noticed anything unusual about Trevor's work schedule or the people he associates with?" Her reflection looked back at me through the mirror. "What do you mean by unusual?" "Phone calls at odd hours, meetings with people he doesn't introduce you to large amounts of cash, anything that doesn't seem typical for pharmaceutical sales." Brooklyn was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her internal struggle between loyalty to Trevor and the doubts that had been growing stronger. "He gets a lot of phone calls he takes in private. And last week when we went to dinner, he had an envelope with what looked like several $1,000s in cash. He said it was expense reimbursement from his company, but it seemed like too much money for restaurant receipts." "Have you met any of his co-workers or friends from before he met you?" "Not really. He says he's very private about mixing business and personal life. The people coming to the wedding from his side are mostly clients and professional contacts." I realized that Brooklyn had been systematically isolated from anyone who might reveal Trevor's true identity. She knew almost nothing about his background, his family, or his life before their relationship began 6 months ago. "Brooklyn, what do you know about Trevor's family? Has he mentioned parents, siblings, childhood friends?" "He said his parents died in a car accident when he was in college, and he's an only child. It's one of the things we bonded over, both feeling like we had to make our own way in the world." She turned from the mirror to face me directly. "Why are you asking all these questions? Do you know something I don't?" This was my moment to decide whether to tell her the truth or let events unfold as federal agents had planned. Looking at my sister beautiful and vulnerable in her wedding dress, I couldn't bring myself to destroy her dream wedding with the knowledge that her fiancé was a criminal who might be planning to disappear with or without her. "I'm just trying to understand him better. You're my sister, and I want to make sure you're making the right choice." Trevor loves me, and he wants to build a life together. That's all I need to know," Brooklyn said, but her voice lacked the conviction I remembered from her previous relationships. Downstairs, Dad was struggling with his morning medications and the stress of hosting 200 wedding guests while facing potential criminal charges. Mom was directing catering staff with manic energy that barely concealed her panic about the family's financial situation. At noon, cars began arriving with wedding guests. Brooklyn's college friends, distant relatives, and family friends filled the house and backyard with congratulations and excitement. No one knew that federal agents were among the catering staff and that the groom was about to be arrested for felony drug trafficking. Trevor arrived precisely at 12:30, wearing an expensive tuxedo and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He moved through the gathering crowd with practiced charm, shaking hands and accepting congratulations while constantly checking his phone. I watched him carefully, looking for signs of the criminal behavior Agent Miles had described. His interactions seemed normal on the surface, but there was something calculating in the way he assessed each person he met, as if he was evaluating their potential usefulness or threat to his operations. At 1 o'clock, cars with Georgia and Tennessee license plates began parking along our street. Men in dark suits emerged and approached the house with the kind of purposeful movement that suggested they weren't here for wedding cake and dancing. Agent Miles had been right. Trevor was using Brooklyn's wedding as cover for a criminal meeting that could put everyone in attendance at risk. In 2 hours, my sister would walk down the aisle toward a man who was either going to disappear with her into a life of crime or abandon her when his criminal empire collapsed. I checked the recording device hidden under my boutonniere and prepared to gather evidence that might save my sister's life and send her fiancé to federal prison. The wedding ceremony was about to begin, but the real drama was just getting started. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at the Hermitage Country Club, a facility that normally hosted corporate events and charity fundraisers. Brooklyn had specifically chosen the venue because Trevor insisted on somewhere that could accommodate his business associates alongside our family and friends. Federal marshals positioned themselves throughout the venue as part of the catering and photography staff, their earpieces hidden, but their watchful eyes constantly scanning the crowd. I wore the recording device Agent Miles had provided, knowing that every conversation would be monitored by law enforcement officers parked in surveillance vans outside the country club. Brooklyn looked absolutely stunning as she prepared for her walk down the aisle. Her dress was ivory silk with intricate beadwork that caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the club's floor-to-ceiling windows. She had chosen to wear our grandmother's pearl necklace, the same one Mom had worn at her own wedding 35 years earlier. But underneath the beautiful facade, I could see the tension in her shoulders and the uncertainty in her eyes. She had spent the morning asking questions about Trevor's background that suggested her own doubts were growing stronger. The romantic fantasy of a perfect wedding was being overshadowed by the reality of marrying someone she barely knew. Dad walked slowly down the aisle with Brooklyn on his arm, and I could see how much effort each step required. His heart condition had worsened over the past few months, and the stress of the wedding preparations and financial crisis had taken a visible toll on his health. He was breathing heavily by the time they reached the altar where Trevor waited, with a smile that looked increasingly forced. Pastor Miguel from our childhood church had agreed to perform the ceremony, despite the rushed timeline and unusual circumstances. He had known Brooklyn since she was a little girl and had privately expressed concerns to Mom about the quick engagement and Trevor's reluctance to participate in premarital counseling. As the ceremony began, I noticed movement among Trevor's guests that didn't match the solemnity of a wedding. Men were checking phones, exchanging glances, and positioning themselves near exits in ways that suggested they were preparing for something other than celebrating love and commitment. During the exchange of vows, Trevor's phone vibrated insistently against his tuxedo jacket. He ignored it the first time, but when it buzzed again 30 seconds later, he glanced toward his associates with an expression that looked more like fear than joy. "Do you, Trevor Walsh, take Brooklyn Morrison to be your lawfully wedded wife to have..." and to hold in sickness and in health for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" "I do," Trevor replied, but his attention was clearly divided between Brooklyn and whatever crisis was developing among his business contacts. Pastor Miguel turned toward Brooklyn. "Do you, Brooklyn Morrison, take Trevor Walsh to be your lawfully wedded husband to have, and to hold in sickness and in health for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" Brooklyn hesitated for just a moment, and in that pause I saw her glance toward the crowd of Trevor's associates. Something in their behavior had caught her attention, and doubt flickered across her face before she answered. "I do." But before Pastor Miguel could pronounce them husband and wife, a commotion erupted near the back of the ceremony space. One of Trevor's associates was arguing loudly with someone on his phone, his voice carrying across the crowd of wedding guests. "The shipment was supposed to be here an hour ago. If the Memphis people don't show up with the product, we're all going to have serious problems." Trevor's face went white as he realized that his criminal associates had just revealed their illegal activities in front of 200 wedding guests and multiple federal agents. The careful facade of a legitimate business gathering collapsed in an instant. At that moment, Dad collapsed. The stress of the day, combined with his existing heart condition and the shock of hearing criminal discussions at his daughter's wedding, triggered a massive heart attack. He fell to the ground next to Brooklyn, clutching his chest and struggling to breathe. Call 911. Mom screamed, rushing toward Dad as wedding guests scattered in confusion and panic. In the chaos that followed, Trevor tried to use the medical emergency as cover to escape with his associates. He grabbed Brooklyn's arm and started pulling her toward a side exit, claiming they needed to get out of the way of emergency responders. But Brooklyn had finally realized what was happening. The pieces came together. Trevor's secretive behavior, the suspicious men at their wedding, the overheard conversation about shipments and products. Her perfect wedding day was actually a cover for drug trafficking, and her new husband was trying to use her as a shield while he fled from law enforcement. "Let go of me," Brooklyn shouted, pulling away from Trevor as federal agents emerged from their positions throughout the venue. "FBI, nobody move. This is a federal arrest operation." Trevor's associates scattered immediately, some heading for exits, while others reached for concealed weapons. The elegant wedding venue became a crime scene as federal agents surrounded the building and began making arrests. I ran toward Brooklyn, who was standing frozen in the middle of the chaos, her wedding dress torn from struggling with Trevor. Agent Miles appeared beside me, speaking rapidly into her radio, while keeping her weapon trained on Trevor, who had released Brooklyn but was still looking for an escape route. "Brooklyn, come here!" I shouted over the noise of sirens and shouting agents. Trevor made one last desperate attempt to reach his car in the parking lot, but federal agents tackled him to the ground 20 feet from where Dad lay receiving emergency medical treatment from paramedics, who had arrived within minutes of Mom's call. As I held my sister while she cried in confusion and terror, I watched Trevor being handcuffed and read his rights for federal charges, including drug trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. His carefully constructed false identity as a legitimate businessman crumbled as agents discovered multiple fake identification documents in his possession. The ambulance rushed Dad to Vanderbilt University Medical Center, while federal agents secured the crime scene and began processing evidence. Brooklyn's dream wedding had become a nightmare, but at least she was safe from a dangerous criminal who had been planning to use her as cover for his illegal activities. Later at the hospital, while we waited for news about Dad's condition, Agent Miles explained to Brooklyn the full scope of Trevor's criminal activities and how close she had come to being an unwitting accomplice in federal crimes. The man she thought she loved had been planning to disappear with stolen drug money, possibly taking her with him as cover or abandoning her to face criminal charges in his place. "Your brother's cooperation helped us arrest not just Trevor, but 6 other members of a drug trafficking network that has been operating across multiple states Agent Miles told Brooklyn. By wearing the recording device and gathering evidence, he potentially saved your life and helped us prevent dangerous medications from being stolen from hospitals. Brooklyn looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and shame. I'm sorry I didn't listen to your concerns about Trevor. I thought you were just being protective, but you were trying to save me from making the biggest mistake of my life. As we waited for news about Dad's surgery, I realized that the crisis had finally forced our family to confront the patterns of communication and trust that had been damaging our relationships for years. The wedding disaster was terrible, but it might also be the beginning of building something better between us. Dad survived his heart attack, but the recovery process took 6 weeks in the hospital, followed by months of cardiac rehabilitation. The doctors explained that years of stress from financial pressure combined with his underlying condition had created a dangerous situation that was worsened by the shock of discovering criminal activity at his daughter's wedding. During those weeks at Vanderbilt, our family had countless hours to talk about the patterns of behavior and communication that had nearly destroyed us. Brooklyn spent entire days at Dad's bedside reading to him and helping with his physical therapy exercises. Mom took a temporary leave from her job as a school secretary to coordinate his care and manage the ongoing legal situations. Trevor's arrest had made national news as part of a larger federal investigation into prescription drug trafficking. The FBI discovered that his criminal network had stolen over $15 million worth of medications from hospitals across the Southeast, reselling them on the black market, while patients went without critical treatments. The trial revealed details about Trevor's systematic targeting of vulnerable families for financial exploitation. Brooklyn was his 15th victim in an elaborate scheme where he would identify women from financially struggling families, seduce them with expensive gifts and promises of wealth, then use their emotional attachment to manipulate their families into funding his criminal operations through fake weddings and business investments. Even more disturbing was the discovery that Trevor had been slowly poisoning Dad with counterfeit heart medications, replacing his legitimate prescriptions with pills that contained harmful chemicals designed to worsen his condition. The goal was to create medical desperation that would drive our family to more extreme financial measures, making us more susceptible to Trevor's manipulation. Once Dad stopped taking the contaminated medications and received proper treatment, his recovery was remarkable. The doctors were amazed by how quickly his energy returned and his breathing improved. What we had attributed to natural aging and stress was actually deliberate poisoning designed to control our family's behavior. Brooklyn's transformation during this period was profound and genuine. The shock of discovering how completely she had been deceived forced her to examine her own behavior and values in ways she had never done before. She enrolled in nursing school, inspired by watching Dad's medical care and wanting to help other people who had been victimized by criminals like Trevor. I spent my whole life thinking I deserved everything handed to me, she told me during one of our conversations in the hospital waiting room. But I never thought about what that cost other people, especially you. You were always taking care of everyone, and I was always taking everything. She began working part-time at a nonprofit organization that helped fraud victims navigate the legal and financial aftermath of their experiences. Her personal understanding of manipulation and deception made her effective at counseling other people who had been targeted by criminals. The legal resolution took several months, but the outcomes were better than we had dared hope. Trevor was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison for racketeering, drug trafficking, money, laundering, and attempted murder through poisoning. His criminal network was completely dismantled, with over 40 arrests across 6 states. The federal government's Victim Compensation Fund provided restitution for medical expenses related to Dad's poisoning, and seized assets from Trevor's criminal activities helped cover some of the wedding expenses our parents had incurred. More importantly, Mom and Dad received complete immunity from prosecution for their financial crimes in exchange for their cooperation with the ongoing federal investigation. Uncle Raymond's gambling debts were resolved when federal agents discovered that his creditors were also connected to Trevor's criminal network. The dangerous people he owed money to were arrested as part of the larger operation, eliminating the threat to our family's safety. 6 months after the wedding disaster, our family relationships had been completely transformed. We started having weekly dinners, where everyone was encouraged to share both good news and concerns without judgment or defensiveness. The patterns of favoritism and poor communication that had dominated our family dynamics were replaced by mutual respect and honest conversation. Dad returned to work part-time as a consulting engineer, using his experience to help other families avoid the financial pressures that had made us vulnerable to exploitation. Mom took a job with a nonprofit credit counseling service, helping people develop sustainable approaches to debt management. Brooklyn graduated from nursing school with honors and was hired by the cardiac care unit at Vanderbilt, where she worked with patients recovering from heart attacks and other cardiac emergencies. Her personal experience with family medical crises made her exceptionally compassionate and effective with scared family members. The house on Belmont Boulevard became a symbol of our family's new beginning. I transferred ownership to a family trust that protected it from future financial mistakes, while ensuring that Mom and Dad could live there safely for the rest of their lives. Brooklyn moved into the guest bedroom while saving money for graduate school, and I kept my childhood room for visits from Austin. We restored our grandmother's garden together, spending weekends planting vegetables and flowers, while talking about our shared memories and hopes for the future. The physical work of rebuilding the garden became a metaphor for the emotional work of rebuilding our family relationships. My business in Austin continued to grow, partly due to positive media attention from my cooperation with federal law enforcement. We developed fraud detection software that was adopted by hospitals and pharmacies to prevent the kind of medication theft that Trevor's network had perpetrated. The technology helped protect vulnerable patients while creating jobs for 15 people, many of whom were hired from the Nashville area. A year after the wedding that never was, Brooklyn met David Chen, a fellow nursing student who was gentle, honest, and completely transparent about his background and intentions. Their relationship developed slowly and naturally, based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than expensive gifts and manipulative promises. When they announced their engagement 18 months later, the celebration was small and authentic. 20 people gathered in our backyard for a ceremony officiated by Pastor Miguel, with food prepared by family and friends. Brooklyn wore a simple dress she had chosen herself, and David's family provided traditional music that reflected his heritage. The contrast with the elaborate, fraudulent ceremony Trevor had planned was striking. This wedding cost less than $2,000 but was filled with genuine love and joy. Both families knew each other well, and everyone present was there to celebrate a relationship built on trust and shared values. Dad walked Brooklyn down the aisle without struggling for breath, his health fully restored, now that he was receiving proper medical care and living without the constant stress of financial crisis. Mom cried happy tears instead of tears of panic, and Uncle Raymond gave a toast about the importance of family honesty and support. I stood beside David as his best man, grateful that my sister had found someone who loved her for who she was, rather than what he could manipulate her into becoming. The ceremony was everything a wedding should be: a celebration of commitment between two people who knew and accepted each other completely. 3 years after that devastating phone call changed everything, I'm sitting in the same kitchen where I grew up, watching Brooklyn prepare dinner for David and their 6-month-old daughter. The house that almost tore our family apart has become the foundation for relationships that are stronger and more honest than anything we had before. Dad is playing with baby Sophie in the living room, his laughter echoing through rooms that once held so much tension and secrets. His recovery from both the heart attack and years of slow poisoning has been remarkable. At 68, he has more energy than he had in his 50s and his doctors say his cardiac function is better than they expected given the damage Trevor's counterfeit medications had caused. Mom manages the family finances with professional oversight, having learned skills through her work at the credit counseling nonprofit that she now applies to helping other families avoid our mistakes. The monthly budget meetings that once seemed impossible for our family to navigate are now routine discussions where everyone contributes ideas and nobody feels judged for past financial decisions. Brooklyn has been promoted to charge nurse in the cardiac unit and is completing her master's degree in healthcare administration. She wants to develop programs that help families cope with the financial stress of medical emergencies, using our experience to prevent other people from becoming vulnerable to exploitation. David works as a pediatric nurse practitioner and volunteers with refugee families, helping them navigate the healthcare system in their new country. Their marriage is everything Brooklyn's relationship with Trevor wasn't built on honesty, mutual respect, and shared commitment to helping others. Uncle Raymond has been gambling free for 2 years and now sponsors other people in recovery programs. He started a small business providing financial literacy education to people who struggle with addiction, turning his painful experience with debt into a way to help others avoid similar problems. The legal victory against Trevor's criminal network established important precedents for protecting fraud victims from prosecution when they have been systematically deceived and manipulated. The case is studied in law schools as an example of how organized crime targets families through emotional manipulation rather than traditional violence or coercion. My business has grown into a significant force in fraud prevention technology, employing over 50 people and working with hospitals, pharmacies, and financial institutions across the country. The software we developed has prevented millions of dollars in medication theft and helped identify hundreds of criminal schemes before they could harm vulnerable patients. But the most important changes have been in how we communicate as a family. We learned that love isn't about protecting each other from difficult truths or trying to solve problems in secret. Real love means trusting each other enough to be honest about struggles and working together to find solutions that preserve everyone's dignity. The house that I bought in secret to protect my parents' pride has become a place where we practice radical honesty about both our successes and our failures. We've learned that hiding financial problems only makes them worse, and that accepting help from family isn't shameful when it's offered with respect rather than pity. Brooklyn's near miss with marrying a dangerous criminal taught us that quick fixes and fairy tale solutions usually hide serious problems underneath. The elaborate, expensive wedding that almost destroyed our family has been replaced by simple celebrations that focus on genuine relationships rather than impressive appearances. 6 months ago, we established the Morrison Family Foundation, a nonprofit organization that helps families who have been victimized by financial fraud and manipulation. We provide legal assistance, counseling services, and practical support for people rebuilding their lives after discovering they have been systematically deceived by criminals. The foundation operates out of our neighborhood, providing services to other families facing the same kinds of crises that once threatened to destroy us. Brooklyn coordinates victim services. Mom handles financial counseling. Dad provides engineering consulting for families dealing with contractor fraud. And I contribute technology resources and business development expertise. Last week, we helped a family whose elderly parents had been convinced to sign over their house to a fake charity organization. The week before, we assisted a woman whose boyfriend had stolen her inheritance through an elaborate investment scam. Every case reminds us how close we came to losing everything and how grateful we are for the opportunity to prevent other families from experiencing similar devastation. The most satisfying part of our recovery has been watching Brooklyn develop genuine confidence and self-respect. The woman who once needed constant validation and expensive gifts to feel valuable has become someone who finds meaning in helping others and building relationships based on mutual care rather than material benefits. Her relationship with David is everything a healthy partnership should be. They support each other's goals, communicate openly about concerns, and make decisions together based on shared values rather than individual desires. Watching them parent little Sophie together shows me what healthy family dynamics look like when they're built on trust rather than obligation. Sophie will grow up in a family that values honesty over appearances, mutual support over individual achievement, and genuine relationships over material success. She'll learn that real security comes from people who love her for who she is not, from accumulating possessions or impressing others with expensive displays. The phone call that started this whole journey came because my parents felt they had no choice but to solve Brooklyn's problems through desperate measures. Today, when anyone in our family faces a challenge, we talk about it openly and work together to find solutions that respect everyone's needs and dignity. We've learned that family wealth isn't measured by bank account balances or property values, but by the quality of relationships and the willingness to support each other through difficulties. The house that I thought I needed to buy in secret to protect my parents' dignity has become a place where we practice the kind of transparency that actually preserves dignity while building trust. Trevor's criminal scheme succeeded for as long as it did because he exploited our family's patterns of poor communication and financial secrecy. By learning to discuss money relationships and concerns openly, we've become immune to the kind of manipulation that once made us vulnerable to exploitation. The wedding that never happened taught us that real commitment isn't demonstrated through expensive ceremonies or public declarations, but through daily choices to prioritize your partner's well-being and your shared future. Brooklyn and David's simple ceremony was more meaningful than any elaborate event could have been, because it celebrated a relationship built on genuine foundation rather than romantic fantasy. Every Sunday, our family gathers for dinner in the dining room, where Trevor once sat planning his criminal activities. The table where my parents once spread out bills they couldn't pay now hosts conversations about our shared goals and the ways we can support each other's dreams. The kitchen where Mom received that devastating phone call from the realtor now fills with laughter as 3 generations work together, preparing meals and planning future adventures. Have you ever discovered that a crisis in your family actually revealed strengths and love you didn't know existed? Sometimes the worst moments in our lives become the foundation for building something better than we ever thought possible. I'd love to hear your thoughts about family relationships and how challenges can bring people closer together. Please share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, I hope you'll hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family crises through honesty and mutual support. Don't forget to share this with anyone who might need encouragement about rebuilding trust in their own relationships. Thank you for listening to our story, and remember that even the most complicated family situations can become opportunities for deeper love and understanding when people choose to face them together with courage and compassion.